Hey there, thanks for tuning in and welcome to another Ellipsis Drive Podcast. Here we dive into the stories of people, companies, and technologies that transform and empower spatial data-driven industries. My name is Rosalie van der Maas, and today we'll be exploring the buy versus build dilemma that every organization faces when designing geospatial infrastructure and solutions. To this end, I'm here with Will Cadell, who is founder and CEO of Sparkgeo. Will, welcome. It's really great to have you.
Absolute pleasure, Rose. This is wonderful to talk about custom services, buy versus build. There's a lot to dig into here.
Great, and the pleasure is all mine. So to kick things off, let's first start with an introduction. Could you tell us a bit more about your background and what has also led you to building Sparkgeo? What did you intend to achieve with the business?
Yeah. There's a few things. So my background, I studied engineering at Aberdeen University in Scotland, and I went straight into environmental remote sensing at that point, and that was because it sounded kind of fun. I didn't really know what it was about, and this is back in I guess 2000 2001, so back in the dim and distant past. From there, I went into a government science role in Scotland, as was the Macaulay Land Use Research Institute, as a spatial modeler. It's a great job title. Actually, a great job. It was like bouncing around Scotland in a Land Rover, doing ground sampling for a team called the Land Allocation Decision Support System. So that was like, it was like Big Ag before Big Ag, which is kind of funny. Anyway, and then I did a municipal job because I thought, oh, everyone in GIS does a municipal job, so I should do that. So I worked for the Corporate Address Gazetteer in Perth and Kinross Council. That was like squashing addresses from multiple databases into one. Oddly enough, addressing has been like a theme of my career. I keep on coming back to addresses. I can get quite boring about addresses. Yeah, I mean, addresses are the best. It's like culturally so interesting. Anyway, I won't go into that. That's not what we're going to talk about today. I then came out to Canada for a big adventure with my wife, and we ended up in the center of British Columbia, the little town called Prince George, because that's the forestry was like hot, and there's lots of mapping in forestry. So picked up a job as a GIS analyst there, and we started using more remote sensing tools at that point. Lots of, but all the way through my career, I was given like remote sensing oriented tasks, but no software. So always had to write software to do tasks within that environment. So whether it was S+, I was using S+ to do remote sensing, which is basically like R these days. And then we were doing more Python stuff over here, and that was all cool because I'd done the engineering stuff before, and so that all fitted. And I got into this place where it's like, oh, well, we can write more and more software to do all this stuff. This makes a tremendous amount of sense. And then 5 years into that, it struck me that we should really be putting maps on the internet rather than putting maps on paper. We were putting maps on paper for the forestry sector. It's like, well, internet's pretty big. We should probably do that. And that was around the time when Google Maps API was something that people were interested in. It just launched as a way you could put a Google map into your website. So we've been doing like open source stuff before that. Map server, if you're familiar, like it was rudimentary GeoServer and stuff. But when that Google Maps thing came out, I was like, oh, this is like a consumer thing. This is like lots of people are going to be interested in this. So I started sort of paying more attention to what was happening in Silicon Valley, and ended up seeing an opportunity with a non-profit startup out of San Francisco called EcoReserve. And like on reflection, I can't think of anything less likely to work than a non-profit startup. Anyway, yeah, I didn't know that at the time. But to do that, I had to start a company. I was still a UK citizen. I was working through my Canadian citizenship, and to sort of contract to this entity, I needed a Canadian company, so I started Sparkgeo. And kind of the rest is history. So to do like that was a neat opportunity because we were putting imagery into a Google map. So it's like ticked a couple of boxes there. It's got the software piece, but it's also got the imagery piece. And I think interestingly, how you carve up and distribute large amounts of data has always been like a thing that I've and that, our organization now have ended up doing, and it's always been a bit of a pain. The definition of large has changed over the last 20 years, but nevertheless, large then was small these days. But we're still solving the same problems. We still want to serve data to the browser in a performant manner and sort of share it around and make it accessible. Still solving all those Earth observation problems. So since then, we've grown. We now have we're center of gravity still very much sort of Western Canada, but we've definitely got people all the way across Canada, and we have a small UK team, and we have just picked up a business in the US as well. So but we still very much focus on services and sort of building custom geospatial tools for whomever is looking for it, whomever sees value in geography.
Makes sense. It makes sense. And it sounds like in your career leading up to founding Sparkgeo, you've been building a lot yourself because it simply wasn't available to buy.
My first 2 or 3 jobs are characterized by being asked to do things that we didn't have tools for. Either we didn't have the license, or we just the tool set didn't exist. So what you're going to do, you're going to write your own. And it's actually kind of interesting when you start digging into images because they're really quite simple. They're just they're just a series of boxes with a series of numbers, and it's and we just represent that in an image, but it's really just a series of pixel colors and bands. So it's once you get that, you're like, oh, I see. This is a really easy thing to mess around with in software. I would argue a little bit easier even than vector stuff, but nevertheless. But it's also heavy, so it's an interesting sort of dilemma to mess around with. It's people are always coming up with new solutions to moving large amounts of data around, and I applaud that because it's not straightforward.
No, absolutely. So let me use your note on that. Throughout your career before starting Sparkgeo, you'd been asked to do stuff that wasn't an off-the-shelf solution available for, and take that as a bridge to Sparkgeo today, enabling organizations to utilize location-based data within their technologies. Can you shed some light on the different options that an organization may have when looking into creating some baseline data infrastructure? What options are on the table when they start to think about this?
Well, so it's I could take that statement a couple of different ways. First thing I'll say is that although I had done lots of software related kind of building of things previous to coming to Canada, it hadn't occurred to me at all to start a business. So working in the Canadian forestry sector is what taught me that people will give you money to do things. And it's it's such a simple realization, but that kind of entrepreneurial spirit was, I just didn't find that in the UK. It might be there now, but I didn't find it in the UK when I was at that point in my career in the UK. So sort of kudos to the sort of Canadian private sector for teaching me simple economics. But then options available, I think is really interesting because it's such a hard thing. On one side, there's a series of softwares that you can buy to do things. And one of our early customers at Sparkgeo was an organization called Nextdoor.com, who subsequently became a unicorn and then IPO'd, all the rest of it. They did the whole thing. And I remember sitting at a cafe on Market Street and saying to the guy, my sort of number one sort of contact there, and he was one of the co-founders. And I said, this, like, we're helping you build this like spatial data infrastructure, which is like the terminology that GIS people use. Everyone else will just say database. But anyway, spatial data infrastructure. And like there are products that will do this. That you could just buy. And he's like, oh, no. Well, you need to understand Silicon Valley. Here, we're going to build it on the OpenStack, and then we're going to write our stuff on top, so we have the IP, and that's it. Like, so there is a very obvious case for certain companies who are financed in certain ways who want to own the entire stack of IP because their investors told them that is where their value lies, and that's fine. And so that's an interesting part of the equation, and that's to say that some different organizations are in a different financing position and are motivated in different ways. So you have those guys who want to build from scratch, and then you have those people who just want to execute a workflow. And if that's the case, then buying something off the shelf can often make the most sense because they're buying a workflow, they get the software package, they get the maintenance package, like that just makes sense. And then you get those organizations who are kind of in the middle. And it's like, okay, I want the workflow, but this workflow isn't quite right, or I've got this weird legacy data set, or I need to, pump it out in that kind of manner, and I need a little bit of help to do that. So there's these three sort of scenarios. One is build from scratch, own the whole thing, and all the way through to I'm just going to buy something off the shelf because that's the easiest way for me to execute on my need as a business or as an organization. And every organization sits on that spectrum somewhere, and they want to invest or not in that technology in a particular manner. And it's also worth noting that depending on the level of investment you make in the particular technology, your liability, so the opportunity to own the IP is there, but there's also a liability with the maintenance of that IP that comes with that, which is not necessarily fully considered when people are making that buy and build decision.
Yeah, I was just about to think also along the lines of like risk. When you buy something off the shelf, people tend to think like, well, maybe it's not exactly what I need, but it's not risky because it's already there and like lots of people use it. So what is your take on like how much more risky it is to have something custom built? Like assuming that you have a professional team at work that knows what they're doing, like what are you seeing there in terms of like, the risk spectrum that you may be on?
So there's two sides of that risk. One is, and I like, we kind of, one of the most stupid things I've learned about being in business is the longer you're in business, the easier it gets. Like, and that's because people are like, oh, Sparkgeo, they've been around quite a long time. They're probably going to be around next year. So it's a safer bet. You know what I mean? And it's like, it's the stupidest thing in the world, but it is actually true. So the longer a company has been around, the more other companies and large companies will trust that organization will continue to be around.
I think I know this too. Like one of the questions that they'll always ask, like a relatively small company, is like, "So when were you founded?" And you know exactly like why they're asking this question. And sort of for me, it's been more easy over the years because it's like, well, 2019, that's our founding date. It feels like quite a while ago by now, but by the time 2021, you're like, "Ah, shit, this question again."
Yeah, I mean it exactly. But these days that must be so weird I mean, if you're asking a question of an AI company, like none of those AI companies are more than 3 years old. I mean, so you think about that, you think, okay, are you going to trust OpenAI? I think you probably are, but I mean, they're not old. So, it's interesting to think about some of those kind of so I think that's a very human nature thing, and there is this notion of trust built into longevity, which you could dig into all you want, but the fact is that people do trust you more if you've been around longer. So there is that piece, but you do have to think about trust versus. So you've got your own team. So who's doing the building? I guess is the question, and who's doing the maintenance? Like in certain circles, organizations in air quotes, want a throat to choke. So they basically want someone to blame if something goes wrong. And you need to think about that within the context of once you build something that lives on the internet or as a piece of software, then that thing has a life of its own, and certain activities need to happen around that entity. So, you know what? I built a web-based tool. Turns out the web evolves independently of my tool, and I need to make sure that that tool stays up to date with, the latest and greatest web trends, security trends, whatever's going on. Like, you need to keep that thing updated. There is a constant need to keep it updated. If you're building a product, that update cycle is a bit easier to manage. If you've built something custom, it's a bit of a pain. And so you have this notional tech debt that just builds up independent of anything else happening, independent of features you want to build or any of that cool stuff. This is the annoying, just like keep up with the internet stuff, which is like, and then people say, oh, can you do this in dark mode? And you're like, oh, do I really have to do that? Like, that doesn't seem like it's adding any value at all. Yeah. But nevertheless, like, these are the expectations of a modern web application. You have to do this, you have to do that. So there is this risk around who is going to be doing that work. So if you've bought a product, it's easier to say, this is going to work. I'm happy. Like, and then I can phone up my support person and say, we need this feature, and they'll tell me that it's going to be delivered in 6 months. That's great. Happy. If you build it yourself, you have this notional sort of fixed cost of software developers. You need to grab that person's time, and they're probably working on a number of different software projects. Like, when's that going to happen? Are you going to have a corporate reorganization? There's a whole bunch of stuff going on there. And then the third case is that you're using a company like Sparkgeo, and then that's great. That's great for us, but it's a constant cost. So it's not a fixed cost, but you're certainly coming back time and time again to say, oh, can you build this feature? Oh, can you update this? Okay, so it might feel different. So there's and then maybe there's like a managed service piece in the middle there, which is another kind of nuance to the discussion. But nevertheless, it's up to the organization who is ultimately maintaining the business workflow to decide where they feel the greatest risk lives. So if your workflow basically involves Excel, then it's likely that Microsoft will be around. So the likelihood of Microsoft failing is low. The likelihood of your macro failing is maybe significantly higher. And the likelihood of the team to do the maintenance is something that only you as an internal manager can understand. However, if you've used a one-person independent software development shop to build something, the likelihood of them being around in 2 years is maybe, well, it's not low, but it's going to be a lot lower than Microsoft. I think we can all agree.
Yeah, that's fair.
So you got this thing going on. We've definitely messed around with certain organizations who had come to us and said, we had this thing built by an individual. We don't know how it works. Can you help us? Because they're not around anymore, or some kind of relationship has failed, and blah blah blah. They need something. They need something fixed, and they don't know how to fix it. And so they've been on the wrong end of that risk decision.
Yeah. So you've described like these different profiles that companies may have, which will nudge them towards, buying something, building something themselves, or having an organization like Sparkgeo build it for them. Do you see people sort of naturally self-select correctly, or do you go through like a few consulting sessions where you sort of guide them along and help to sort of elevate or highlight some of the risks or considerations that may not be so obvious to them?
Yeah, so I'll dial in your word correctly there. There's no right answer, but there's several wrong answers. I would say it's one of those situations. So the definition of correct for an organization is very much depending on the needs of the organization and the characteristics of that organization, whether they have the appropriate management, whether they have any developers, all that kind of stuff. And so like whether you would use Sparkgeo to build something from scratch will probably depend on the nature of your organization. I would say, in my experience, geospatial is one of those kind of annoying sectors where almost everything feels a little bit custom. Not very custom, but just a little bit. And that's why we have like a plethora of sort of geospatial developers, GIS developers all over the place, because everything just needs to be tweaked in a particular manner, or everyone feels things need to be tweaked. Like I always, like going back to the forestry days, I always wanted to just completely automate some of the mapping processes. But boy, those foresters really like their maps in a particular way. Like, and different foresters would want their map in a different particular way. And it's like, this is nonsense. Like, we could make this a single button process if you guys would just be less picky about stuff. But, you know, as a cartographer, you want to do your best for people, and it's actually kind of fun doing mapping. So you know what? Yeah, you do your thing, and that's fine. But
like a lot of the GIS, like the classic GIS professionals, like owe their livelihood to the fact that people are very picky in terms of like how we see things visualized. I mean, we're visual beings after all, but in a way, we also shoot ourselves in the foot with it. But yeah,
but it's interesting because Google came out with Google Earth, and it's like the imagery is rubbish. You see all these cut lines, but like most people just don't care because they're like, this is really cool. The 3D, I can spin around. And it's like, you just got a GIS that just has like a 3D environment built in, and you're happy. Like it solves 90% of GIS problems out of the box, and it like to most cartographers looks rubbish, and it's I mean, you got to hand it to Google. They build the consumer GIS product that challenge many corporate GIS environments. I mean, and that's like a 10 years old view. Obviously, things are different now. Google Earth has gone through various iterations, but the lightweight approach of an easy product was a revolution. I think.
I agree.
So interesting. Yeah.
So, as Sparkgeo, do you guys ever have to make buy or build decisions, or is for you always the answer to build, because that's also what you're being employed for? Or do you sometimes make like a mosaic solution when it's appropriate?
Yeah. We'll definitely make those buy or build decisions, especially around things that are and also we use project management tools. We use Scoro, we use Pipedrive, we use various different other tools running our company. Like, we could do all that stuff, but that, then we're burning the time on ourselves that we could be putting into customer work, which, that's, and also project management software is not our expertise. I mean, we do a lot of project management and we've got great project managers, but building project management software is not the expertise we built. So that doesn't necessarily speak to our value, and it's not really what our engineers are excited to get up and do every morning. So yeah, we definitely have certain technologies that we buy. Around geospatial stuff, I think we're less likely to. I think we're more likely to build things, but then we do a lot. I mean, a lot of our time is spent talking to customers about what they need. And I have no interest in reinventing wheels. So when it makes sense, we bring in products for those customers. So we've definitely built technology on top of Esri stacks. We've definitely built technology that integrates with, large sort of vendor-based geospatial sort of spatial data infrastructure, if you like. But I mean, our value is in delivering the solution to the customer. And I think what's interesting, and like, I actually just posted about this on my Substack like yesterday or day before. The notion that I think geospatial is a deep horizontal. Like it's like a little piece of thousands of business processes, millions of business processes, but it's rarely the whole piece. So I think about that as a deep horizontal. I think AI is also a deep horizontal. It's really like the whole question or the whole answer, but it's often a really useful component to an answer. So when you think about it in those terms, it's like, okay, well, it actually makes sense that there would be like a workflow created around the use of geography. Now, is there necessarily a piece of software in there? Maybe, because maybe you've got to manage some data, maybe you've got to serve some data, maybe you've got to, bring it in, do some kind of analysis and pipe out some kind of analytic. Cool. But that's going to look different for every single customer, like depending on the business environment they're in, their sort of fiscal constraints, all that kind of stuff. So how that looks will be different. The workflow will be the same, probably. So how do you sculpt that appropriately within a cloud environment or different constraints or whatever it is that the customer is doing? Like in services line, I mean, as opposed to product line, if we switch the paradigm to the person selling, it's the services sales discussion is actually very easy. It's like, what do you want? We can build anything. What's your budget? Whereas the project, like the product sales discussion is like, can you do this? Yes. Can you do that? No. Can you do this? Yes. Can you do that? No. It's much more of a kind of, and then the consumer gets to choose whether there are enough yeses for them to buy the product. And if there are enough yeses, it's great. Okay, well, we'll do this. We can't do that, but great. We've got most of what we need. So in services line, it's really interesting. It's like, yeah, we can do anything you want. Like we can build whatever you want. That's great. How much money do you want to spend on this project? And then we will constrain what you actually need to do into a workflow that meets your budget. And so it's like, I'm obviously not going to deliver a Ferrari to someone who, can only afford a Ford Focus. I mean, but that's fine. I mean, that's the reality of project work. So figuring out the appropriate engineering to meet the needs of a customer, that's the key piece, and that's the piece that and that's why the services like sales discussion is kind of high touch. It's like you've got to have a long conversation and figure out expectations and manage those expectations and have a good project management team who also understand those expectations. Mm-hmm. So like we all know when something has worked and we all know when something hasn't worked. And then once we have both, like everyone understands those two things, then discussions just become straightforward. Like, well, of course we're going to get it from doesn't work to work, or we're going to meet expectations as defined. And like I said, I definitely feel that geospatial is often a little bit custom, very much like the AI situation. So AI, there was the MIT report that came out late last week about 95% of Gen AI pilots failing for various different reasons. But yet, large proportions of those organizations in which the pilots were failing, staff were using generic consumer tools to help them in their day-to-day workflow. So they're using Claude or they're using ChatGPT. Yet the corporate AI stuff is failing. I'm like, that's so interesting. Why are people accelerating their own workflows, yet their corporate workflows aren't working at all? I think that's really interesting. But I would argue very similar in geospatial. I think people, bust out to things like Google Maps very frequently when their corporate system might not have the recency they're looking for, or might not have the user interface they're looking for. They'll just bust out to Google Earth or Google Maps to do something. And I think that it's a very similar workflow. So what we see in AI is actually very similar to what we've been working with in geospatial forever. Except that I would say that OpenAI's announcement of a consulting office, and for each contract be worth $10 million, that's not the same fiscal reality we're working with in geospatial at all.
No, that's true. I also think
Disappointing.
interesting, like you mentioned that the sales conversation on the services side can be very simple, but at the same time also very hands-on because you need to
Yeah.
guide someone towards like a fitting level of expectation that fits their budget. But that also requires that trust that you mentioned before, because talking about finances makes people
Yeah.
also kind of iffy. Like, hey, what if I tell you that my budget is X? Then you're just gonna, take that
Yeah.
to leverage your own
Yeah.
agenda. So I can
Yeah.
imagine that
Like trust is so
trust
important.
building is key.
Yeah. But also, it also means that the people doing the sales or the business development in the services environment need to have a much deeper level of domain expertise to create that trust. It's like, we've done this before, we know what we're doing. Whereas often in the technical sales, in sort of traditional kind of, software technical sales, you will not have that deep level of expertise in a salesperson, because it's much more about sort of ticking off features and persuading people that something can be done within a certain environment. So that trusting is so important.
Yeah, the incentives for like the classic salesperson can sort of not align with what the client actually needs or what the prospect actually needs, and that can create friction.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's very much about it's very much a numbers game to hit commissions at that point, which is you can do that in services, but you end up with enormous friction in your organization because the salesperson will have committed to a customer that they can do something, and the engineers will look at that and say, "That's not possible. What are you even talking about? You idiot! You set us up for failure." So the services team needs to be very much aligned on the effort that we feel something will take. So it's a different environment, that's for sure.
Yeah, I understand that. So, do you have some mistakes that you've witnessed that you've learned from, or that like future clients can learn from? Because you already mentioned like, hey, we asked this one developer to create the solution, and now the developer is off to a new adventure, and we don't know what we're left with in terms of stack. Like, what are some other sort of common challenges or mistakes that you've seen that you'd like to prevent people
underinvesting in a couple of times people have come to us and said, we want to use your, like, you've got engineering expertise. Oh, but we don't need a project manager. And we're like, yeah, I know you do. You definitely need a project manager. And so, or that they would try and manage the project themselves, because I think project management is an undervalued skill set, or it's something that people just think they can do. So that's a piece that there are certain teams that are great at innovating, and there are certain teams that are great at executing. And we've built our competence around execution. So because we feel that if we're to engage robustly with the commercial sector, we've kind of got to be able to follow through with what we say we can do. So being good at execution is important to us. And to do that, you got to invest in project management. Like you just got to care about that. Now, project management can take various different forms, and our project management sort of system, if you like, kind of morphs around different technologies that our customers might use. So some customers will be on GitHub, some will be on whatever's on GitHub, but some will be using Git projects, some will be using Jira, blah 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 blah. So like we'll morph to those kind of systems, but we're sort of over communicative, and we very much want to set expectations from the get go, and that's like that whole notion of expectations is so very important when you're building software from scratch, certainly. So that's a piece that's important. I mentioned the situation where there was an independent developer. Independent developers are usually less expensive because they have less overhead. So like, it's a cheap way to go. And you can have a friend helping you out, and all that stuff works. And I'm not saying by any means don't use an independent developer, but do make sure that they don't deliver code that is encrypted and that you forget the key for, which is what we've seen. And then we've had to subsequently reverse engineer based on inputs and outputs, which is a painful process for everybody to go. So that's the kind of stuff that does happen that just is utterly needless. So by all means, I mean, I was an independent developer for like 4 years. So like, by all means, use independent developers. It's a great thing to do. Builds the economy, gives some people a great flexibility in their lifestyles, all that kind of stuff. But just be cognizant of A, it can be hard to find them. B, make sure your products are correct. C, make sure that they can write software and manage their own time. That whole thing. So like, just be cognizant of that. With an organization like Sparkgeo, we've got a bit more overhead, but that overhead comes with sort of project management expertise and depth, and an ability to have like flexible teams. So you can switch out a UI person for a back-end person when it makes sense within a project. So you can have all that kind of stuff, and it's all connected and it's all gelled. But to do that, it's got more overhead. So other major problems I've seen: underestimating the cost of data, underestimating the needs, like the data needs and the availability of data. That's often a remote sensing thing. Sometimes you just can't get what you need to get. And then like, people they'll see like the Silicon Valley story is always interesting because it flips between things being free and then things being wildly expensive. So it's got this rule of big numbers going on in Silicon Valley. It's like, oh, I want this to be ludicrously inexpensive. And then on the other hand, but it's worth $100 million. And it's like, I don't know where to go with those things. So like, there's this notion that everything should be wildly cheap. And it's like, well, not in the services land, because we're effectively billable hours, whether you like it or not. You can do value-based pricing and all that kind of stuff, but in the end, you're paying for people's time.
Yeah. I also recognize
it just comes with the cost.
I also recognize that feeling of like, things are either very cheap or very expensive when it comes to buying and using remote sensing data, like satellite data. Like, it's either open data as free to use, but then when people are like, well, I need to have that bit more resolution, and all of a sudden they have a bill that they can't for the life of them afford based on their business case. And I think that's also an interesting one, because you always have that conversation around, okay, so what do you need? In essence, like, a lot of data is available, but it probably doesn't match your budget. So that's the other expectation that you probably end up managing a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of that will change over time. We are definitely seeing more imagery on the market. So I wouldn't say we've got a commoditization of imagery yet, but there's definitely more imagery on the market. So there's some players that are, driving the cost of imagery down. And I would also say that within sales line, services line, like, if I was to build spatial sort of data storage thing, it's like clearly going to be wildly more expensive than buying a product off the shelf. It just is. Right. Because you're building it from scratch, and it will take a while to build. So there really should be a good reason to do that. And sometimes there's obvious reasons. We talked about IP before, blah, blah, blah. But like, there really should be a good reason to not buy something, because the buying of something just makes a ton of sense. So from a fiscal perspective, but also from a maintenance perspective. Now, if you need something special, buy the thing that allows you to plug in something custom, and away you go. And that's a great approach. And that's why, like, most web software should be largely API driven these days, because then it allows you to plug in a piece of software to do something and then move on. But we are definitely seeing some reluctance around vendor lock-in to certain technologies as well. So there's that piece as well. But like, what is the value to an organization of not being locked into a vendor? It's not straightforward. So like, and these are I mean, I've obviously got a bias because I run a services company, so I'm gonna be biased. But there's definitely situations where it does. Like, you can see this. You can look at it and say, you should just do this. Like, you don't need us. Like, you should just not use us. It would be disingenuous with me. Kind of a waste of my time. Kind of a waste of your time. You should just go and buy that product because that's going to solve all your problems. Like, but sometimes, companies need a little bit of developer help or this, that, and that thing.
Yeah. I also see your note on like the if you end up buying a solution, it should be something that is interoperable and that allows you to plug in new stuff so you have the flexibility you may still need. So I think within buy land or product land, there is also like there are a number of things you can do to like stretch up the possibilities a bit and to create that flexibility. But to close off, like what is Sparkgeo looking to achieve before the end of the year? Anything
before the end of this year?
Yeah.
Oh my word. I don't know. So we've just had our best year ever. So it's been like, so our fiscal year is like ends in July. So
I see.
So like, we're back into year one again, or like Q1 for us. I know it's like weirdly confusing. I don't know why we ended up doing that. We should have stuck the calendar because it's just easier. Although I would say that having it mid-year, like you don't want your Q4 to be in December. That's a disaster because like December's gone anyway. No one does anything in December. So I don't know. Whatever. That's a new one. But what do we want to achieve? Well, we're gonna do more with our US entity. I need to get that figured out. We've done a little bit of corporate restructuring to make us a bit more resilient. I'm seeing in the economy, I think there's a lot of opportunity, but I see also a lot of complexity. So I've been thinking a little bit harder around resilience and around how to build resilience and around how to build sort of a level of decentralization, which I think is going to be really, really important. I think for small companies, optionality is key. So sort of building those kind of philosophies into our organization is interesting. We're looking hard at the comparisons between foundation models and sort of traditional machine learning analytics at the moment. We see that foundation models they're in my view an inevitability. They're going to be great. They're not great yet, but they're going to be great. So how do we help that process along? How do we help these things become great? We're the kind of organization, because we're like a generalist, we do a lot of different analytics. We're the kind of organization that should benefit most from a foundation model. Yeah. So I'm very motivated to help that process along. Whether we can deliver meaningful products to our customers yet with that method, I still think is a question. But we're very motivated to figure out what that's going to look like and to be in that discussion. So that's cool. And then I still think that altogether too many organizations store data on like external hard drives and on computers, and they should be getting that stuff out to the cloud so it's readily available to do the more whizzy, exciting things with. So the amount of data that's locked up on external hard drives on people's shelves, I wouldn't want to calculate the amount of money in surveys that is sitting on people's shelves that could be put to meaningful use, like whether it be change detection or whatever. I think that kind of stuff is crazy. So like holding people to account on putting their data to work is something that has been a constant theme, and I expect you're in the same boat on
amen to that for
subject.
sure.
Yeah,
very much so.
Like external hard drives have their place, but it shouldn't be as a robust data storage mechanism.
It's not for the ages.
Free the data. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right. So with that, our time is up. Will, thank you so much for sharing your story today. And if you're tuned in and you'd like to know more about Will, about Sparkgeo, we'll leave some links in the description so you can find what you're looking for. So thanks for being with us today, and until the next one.
Absolute pleasure.
Cheers.